My Govanen, one and all, and welcome to the Literary Baptists, where we discuss important and wonderful works of literature from the perspective of confessional Baptists. The entire panel is here once again. Nick, Zach, and Maddie, how's everyone this evening?
Good. I'm here.
Man, you guys are the worst.
I'm here, man. I'm here. Yeah.
I'm fantastic. Nick looked like he was going to say something a little sooner than he did.
Present.
It was the face of someone who has actually three things they could say, but is trying to decide which one of them to say.
Yeah, and I decided against all of them.
It's that time of night where you start doubting.
Parts of them was conviction that prevented me. So
sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So.
I just want to wish everyone a happy Noahic Covenant Awareness Month.
Amen.
Make the rainbow great again.
You promise not to flood us anymore.
Yes, that's true. And we're spending one of the first evenings of a Noahic Covenant Awareness Month talking about a very morally conflicted individual in Tolkien's work. Actually, now that I mention that, one of the things that annoys me the most about some of the things people say when they say they don't like Tolkien's work is that everything's good and evil, and all the characters are cleanly divided between guys that are purely evil and guys that are purely good. And I even though that happens, that not every character is like that. There's quite a few gray area people, a few I could name, and a few we'll end up talking about in the course of the book. But I think Feanor is one of those guys. I'm just going to put my cards on the table now. I think he's a very conflicted individual. And so our chapter tonight is sort of the beginning of his adventures and the things he did. Only the beginning of it. There's much more to do, but I think he's an interesting character. It's chapter 6 of the Silmarillion of Feanor and the Unchaining of Melkor, aka Morgoth, and Feanor is the guy that gave Morgoth that name, so it's more of a nickname for that bad boy. Anyone want to venture an initial gloss of what goes on in this chapter? There's a few different beats.
I have a comment on the second sentence of this chapter. So I guess it's kind of the first one too. It's talking about the Eldar and everything, and then it says this was the noontide of the blessed realm. And then later it also refers to the noontide of the elves. I think it says those things, and I was kind of thinking about it, like they peak fairly early, it seems, and then it's a long downhill, and I'm wondering if
the long defeat.
Yeah, does Tolkien think the same way about people? And if so, like, what would you consider to be our time? Do we have like two-parter with I don't know, creation and then that go into Noah? Like, do we have like multiple parts? Like, do we have that kind of same situation? Do we have a height? Do we have a period? I guess Jesus would probably be the highest point, but also there was a lot of other stuff going on at the same time that I wouldn't consider to be the noontide. So that was my question: is do we have an analog, or do you think Tolkien would have one for real life history to the noontide?
Well, it's kind of it almost seems like the opposite for us of a noontide. So we go we start at creation and go down until we get to the cross, and then we start to climb back up, right? That post mill. So Tolkien obviously was not, right? There's a rise and fall of the society. But you see that throughout
just like a
history.
rise and fall of Mars Hill.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have like a 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
And like right now we're like probably 9, 10 o'clock. We're trying to get back. We're in the late hours of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. It's getting brighter.
But noon's coming again.
I thought it was an interesting analogy to compare a day to like all of history, or an epoch of history. And
I think it says the thing it says more is how he views the elves. Like if the elves are peaking at this point, then the age of men is much longer and historically interesting than we would normally think. Like a lot of times when we read this work, we're thinking, oh, by the time of the Third Age and the events of the War of the Ring, it's still the age of elves because elves are still in Middle Earth. And the age of men is coming once the last elf leaves. But really, once we leave the first age, the age of the elves is donezo. Once, spoiler alert, once Numenor is established, like men do run the show. Like there are still elves in Middle Earth, but they're all in their little enclaves. And even the High King of the elves, he still just lives in a particular hidden woodland realm. So definitely not the grandeur and power that was held by the Eldar at this point, in Aman. So they were greatly diminished even by the time of the Second Age. And really they're helping men in their efforts as they, take dominion. So I do kind of see it interestingly as like, age, like creation, the age of creation, fall of man, right? With the dip of the elves after the noontide, and then the rise of men, and then, as a like a redemptive arc almost.
It's like those ocean waves that Galadriel rides.
Yeah, that sounds
as she
right.
swims the sundering seas.
Yeah, it's almost like, but like
Ugh.
reading it, it's almost like he presupposes the fall of any society. Like you're gonna have a peak and then it's downhill. Like every society falls.
Yeah.
Even like why was there a? I mean, I know Melkor was chained, but you get
By your boy.
you get the feeling that there's like the possibility of corruption even in the undying lands, where there's no evil, but you still have Feanor and his desires, and even going back to what Aule did. Not that he was corrupted, but the possibility is always there. So it's like, where does that come from? That's the
I
problem
don't think it's an
problem of
accident
evil.
that this is called the noontide of the Eldar at the time that Feanor is figuring out how to make greater and greater jewels. So like his work is his craftsmanship is increasing, and then at the same time Melkor is released from his captivity. I think there's a things are peaking, and then something else is happening that hits the trough and kind of brings everything down.
Yeah.
And we can unpack that, but I think those two things together, the confluence of those things, which are in the title, like the title, I think is the title for the reason, because, of Feanor and the Unchaining of Melkor. There's like a weird, like at this point, Feanor isn't outright doing outright evil things. He's, approaching the zenith of his power at the same time that Melkor is regaining some of his power that had been taken away from him. I don't know. I think there's some interesting interplay there.
To kind of change the subject, but also going back to what Zach said, I do think that this idea of like an early peak followed by the long decline it's actually similar to what happens with nations, with a lot of organizations, with denominations. Like I feel like I see this happen quite often. Like you have this early peak and it's like, yeah, things are going great. And then it's like, oh, you're going to compromise. You're going to compromise. I forget what it's called, but there's like a rule about political organizations where if it's not like explicitly conservative, it'll switch and become against. I forget what it is, but it's like, oh yeah, you have to have it explicitly in there or it's going to change very quickly. And I think that's pretty similar to a lot of organizations as well. I feel like I see it a lot with denominations and associations.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, in my so I've been reading my biography for the reading challenge is Stephen Nichols' R.C. Sproul biography. And I was listening to the first few chapters while I was on the mower this week. And he was talking about how the liberal drift of the PC USA and how like that, so that it had all affected the seminaries and everything like that. And then of course that's going to flow into the creation of the PCA, which is what Sproul was part of once he was in the ministry. And then now we can see what's going on in the PCA now, which isn't that much dissimilar to the initial drift of the PC USA. Everything old is new again. The same drift is affecting the organization that came out of the drift from before.
Yeah. The SBC got to do it twice.
Yeah, Baptists have their own, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah. They've had it twice in the same organization.
Yep.
Which was kind of nice to have the conservative resurgence, but wasn't long lasting.
Not long enough.
Yeah.
How many more times can the phoenix rise from its own ashes?
I think it's done.
So I want to go back though to your earlier question, Nick, about like the rise and fall of early human history or whatnot. I was just thinking of like pre-flood time frame. I'm like, we just don't have a whole lot of facts about what happened. It was a pretty long span of time, and we have like just a couple chapters that deal with, that time period. But at the end of chapter 4 in Genesis, it talks about where Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. To me, that sounds like a peak, or at least the beginning of a peak for the antediluvian time period, pre-flood. Because obviously they get to the point at some point where it's nothing but wickedness.
Mm-hmm.
But it's I know Tolkien's not trying to do any sort of one-for-one thing here. So in some sense, you kind of get a hint of like they're kind of in the Garden of Eden. But it's obviously already a little bit tainted. But there is that element in this chapter of Melkor being there in the Blessed Realm and then being kind of set free and trying to manipulate people and deceive people, which is obviously a serpent in the garden.
If possible, even the elect.
Right. Is Feanor the elect?
If possible.
You
were the best of us,
for
Anakin.
1,000 years. It's the millennial reign.
It's interesting. So, when we think about Ammon, the Undying Lands, whatever you want to call it, depending on how familiar you are with the Lord of the Rings. We often think of, and I've even said it on this podcast, that this is basically heaven on earth. And there's something you said, Zach, a little bit earlier, that there can be evil that happens in Aman. And I was thinking about that as I was rereading this chapter. We have somebody in the place that we call the Undying Lands in the Third Age. We actually have an elf who dies in Aman right at the beginning of this chapter. And it had never hit me before the way that it hit me when I was reading to get ready for this episode. But that shatters that whole category that I think the movie set up for us for sure. We always think of elves as undying, eternal life people. They're the ones that are supposed to live forever, and yet we have here a she elf who dies, and it specifically says passes away. So whatever that means for elves, but I wasn't quite sure what to make of that. I had kind of forgotten about that. How can you die in Aman?
It is connected to Feanor's birth, though.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's that he is evil. He is one of those people that falls completely on that side, and somehow that messed things up, or if it's because he's such a strong character. Like, reading something like medieval or even early modern, there are things that don't really like make sense. Like if a mother died in childbirth today, we wouldn't assume that child is going to be like evil or super strong or something like that. But when you're reading something that's like medieval, it's like, oh yeah, that dude's going to like turn out to be crazy in some way. If like his mother dies in childbirth, like there's just always something that is, that it means something. And with Tolkien, you can also kind of assume that too.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether it is strength and power, or if it's evil. One thing that I do think he kind of flips on this one, though, is that with that death, in some of the medieval ones, you'd think like, oh, the father's going to hate the guy, is going to hate his son now. And his father's like, yeah, great, he's a good guy, loves him, and they're friends. And so it is kind of flipped a little bit, and it's different than what you might expect. So I never know what he's going to do.
There's certainly like a bit of, I'm always tying stuff back to the Bible. I don't know. I'm like pushing it through and trying to make it work.
It is kind of what we do.
Yeah, it's a good trait.
But as long as I guess you're doing it right. But I was thinking of Jacob and Rachel and how Benjamin, is born and then she dies. And Benjamin is obviously Joseph was his favorite, whom he thinks is dead already.
His replacement favorite.
Yeah, his second runner-up. But so there you see an example of a father, favoring children from a particular mother, and then also Benjamin because Rachel had died. So Jacob, has a pattern of favoring people. He could have not liked Benjamin, but he certainly did.
Yeah.
So there's that, but like also,
and also major rift between the sons of one mother and the sons of another mother too.
Yeah.
Similarly. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No,
I did it. I didn't want to, but I did it.
You could just edit it. No, I'm just kidding.
Too much work.
We don't do that here. But just the ominous, it's totally foreshadowing something bad is happening with the death of a mother. Mothers are life-giving, and obviously like historically that's been like the number one cause of death for women. for a large part of history is childbirth related death. But like Nick was saying, in stories it's just there's a significant purpose for that. And it certainly gives me, I'm just hard pressed to think that it's not ominous and about Feanor, like the nature of Feanor, especially how Finwë says, like, don't these lands heal you, or aren't these healing lands? And she's like, she can't recover, and she passes away. It's just something there for sure.
Yeah, it's almost like bearing Feanor wore her out and made her weary to the point that she couldn't see a future to go on into. Not a purposelessness, but like a hope, a kind of hopelessness that made her weary. Now, in the passing away thing, of course, that's different than what we say when we say someone passed away, because in Middle Earth, elves actually could potentially be reincarnated back into Middle Earth as well. It happens with a character that we meet in the Silmarillion who shows up in the Lord of the Rings. So we know of at least one occasion where it happened. But I would tend to think that for that change that happened in her, I think she would refuse to re-enter Middle Earth as well. She'd just chill out in the halls of Mandos, far, far away from Feanor, probably.
One other thing that is that her body is still there, and
unwithered,
uncorrupted. And it reminds me of when I read Bede, the
so venerable
history. Yeah, the venerable Bede.
Man, that dude was so venerable.
He was. and whenever they were trying to determine whether somebody was a saint, and they were like, man, we don't know if this guy's a saint, they dig him up. And if he had like corrupted, if his body had decomposed, or if his body wasn't decomposed, that's when they knew that guy's a saint. He's great. And I don't know.
Or he's a vampire. We don't really know. Or
he's a vampire.
Jury's
didn't seem to think so. But
do you like the Dwight Schrute funeral thing where you just like shoot him a few times to make sure they're dead?
Just to make sure. Yeah, I'm not gonna pass any judgment on these people from like 1400 years ago, but on their sainthood based on how decomposed they were. But that is kind of it's a marker of like saintliness, holiness back then, and I'm guessing that he maybe included some of that in this to show that she was a good person.
It's definitely very Catholic of him.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to say something about that if we didn't get that far. And he was, and Finwë was so dutiful, like he kept visiting the grave
for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a decline in the duty as well. There was kind of like this early peak, and then it kind of declined.
I bet you Feanor still did, though. Because he definitely resented his dad remarrying. Definitely resented it.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like Feanor like kind of just like sucked the life force out of her, though. I had a hard time. I don't know. I can't decide if it's like she just gave all of herself and all of her energy into him, or he like took it.
I don't know. She kind of does a prophetic thing where she says, "Hold me blameless in this and in all that may come after." So it's like she's kind of like, "Hey, heads up, this is gonna go bad."
It's interesting too, because when I first read it, I should have known better. But the first time I read this, I was just like, "Oh, everything of yourself," because as like a mom, you do that. Like it's kind of what you do. But now that I know what comes later, it's like, oh, you see the foreshadowing come through here real strong.
It is indeed unhappy, said Muriel, and I would weep if I were not so weary. But hold me blameless in this, and in all that may come after. Whew. That's a really despairing last speech. Because then she goes to sleep and her spirit departs. There was a thing that said, never again shall I bear a child, for strength that would have nourished the life of many has gone forth into Feanor. Almost like he selfishly took all of that, and may we say, burn it up in the fire, the secret fire that heated him, his ambitions. As if a secret fire were kindled in him. That's the phrase that's used.
Well, that's his name.
Yeah.
Spirit of Fire.
Spirit of Fire. Yeah, Anor is fire in Elvish. Anybody want to opine on the significance of that secret fire part? I know in back channels before we recorded, I had messaged at one point and said, "Isn't this what wasn't this what the initial fire was called at the beginning, at the creation of the world? But that was called the flame imperishable, with capital letters. So he had a secret fire. Is that different from the flame imperishable?
I think so, but possibly not. What was it that Gandalf uses when he's talking to the Balrog in Lord of the Rings? Was that also flame, or is it fire?
Let me look it up.
I think it was. I thought it was flame.
Okay.
The flame of Anor, I think, is what he says. I'm gonna grab my paper.
So
I don't know. I feel like secret is like never good. At least not in Tolkien.
Yeah, that usually signals something.
He says, "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor."
So if Gandalf's got it too.
So is secret fire another name for the flame imperishable?
Or is it something Tolkien failed to retcon? Maybe in his mind initially, the secret fire was the same, and he changed it in the Ainulindale to the flame imperishable. Because you're right, secret normally does connote something evil and underhanded. People that have secret councils, people that make powerful things in secret, like Aule making the dwarves and nobody else knew about it. Granted, that was turned into something that was good, but that was at the will of Eru. That wasn't necessarily inherently good, done by Aule. It was made to be good. But yeah, usually something secret isn't good.
There's definitely mixed signals on this one. And we talked about it at one point about Gandalf as well. And it's hard to know, because even with biblical language, you include that, and it just doesn't seem like it should be a good thing in so many ways. But then also sometimes, you do have good ways in which it's used. So it's not a clear word in these because of all these pieces that pull in two different directions.
Like there are things that are secret about God, but they're not secret because God's hiding them. They're secret because our minds are too small to understand the depths of God, right? So there are parts of God's perfections that we will never understand, not because God wishes them to be hidden from us, but because as creatures we're too finite to put those pieces together.
Yeah.
I did do a quick search, and some do think that it is an alias of the flame imperishable.
Interesting.
And I suppose what you could say is that there's a level of, if it's tied to that, like a level of creativity, which you do see in Feanor. He's able to create far and beyond what others are. And since he did take kind of the life force, if you will, of many, you know, he has this extra. He's extra. What can we say?
Boy, he is extra, if nothing else. Yeah, master craftsman of the elves. Every major work of creation done by an elf in later times will always be compared to Feanor. And especially,
he's even an archivist and historian that's better than, what is it, Rumil? Man,
he does it all, man.
Yeah, is it Rumil? He was, just giving us some credit early on in the chapter, and then it's like, well, then Feanor is actually bettering his work. he was the best.
He made a language.
He was the best historian for maybe 4 paragraphs. So it's pretty disappointing there.
Yeah, he was a master historian, master craftsman, master linguist. It was his elvish characters, Noldor and Elvish, that was the lingua franca for a long time before it got banned. So yeah, just kind of like a superpower, basically.
I think I'm kind of jumping ahead towards the end of this really long chapter that we're dealing with here. But just how it talked about how Melkor tried to take credit for what Feanor did, but then he said that he did it in secret. And there's that secret coming in again. And people doing things in secret is just not a great idea. It just seems like even if you mean it for good, there's just something. I mean, Feanor is ignoring the wise counsel, and he does it in secret. I mean, I guess it's good that he didn't do it with Melkor, but still.
Don't keep secrets, people.
Yeah.
It's just not.
Yeah, imagine how bad that would have been.
Oof. The book would have ended right here. Couple more chapters and then that's it.
End.
Yeah. It's so funny because like Feanor hates Melkor. Like he hates him deeply, and yet they are so alike. It's uncanny. And they'll get more and more alike the more we read. But even at this point, this secret activity, the resentment of others, it's made pretty clear. Melkor out and out hates the Eldar. He hates the elves so much for what they've done and the way they reflect, the way they image Eru, really, being image bearers of Eru, who he hates the most. And if there aren't great biblical parallels to that, I don't know what there is. That's part of our issues with Noahic Covenant Appreciation Month, right? In so many ways, it's an attempt to erase the Imago Dei from people in lots of different ways.
While they push to edit their meat avatars. Because...
Yes.
Erasing their objective beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
What's so perplexing though is you have a character like Feanor, like you said, who hates Melkor, and yet he's not good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how to
You
process
you
that.
can hate evil and not be virtuous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because evil, like selfishness, two selfish people are not going to get along and be
Mhm.
like, oh,
Right.
yeah, that's a person that I can get along with. We're both very selfish.
Mhm.
But two people who are selfless can get along because they're selfless. You know,
Mhm.
that's so that the virtue is uniting and sin is breaks people apart. Even if both sides are sinful, they'll still they can still be at odds. They can work together too. Not that sinners don't hang out with sinners, but sometimes it can cause fissures.
They tend to not get along as well as Christians do with other Christians. Not saying
Yeah.
that Christians always get along, but there's really something to having a similar to having a similar story of how you got where you are. You know, like the leveling that redemption from sin, the effect that that has on human relationships, let alone reconciliation with God in your relationship to your Creator. Primarily, obviously, but on a secondary level, the walls that redemption breaks down between people, you know, between ethnicities and socioeconomic status and all these other things. It really does bring people together in a way that hanging out and committing your favorite sins together does not.
Yeah, and that's why, it's so important that God, gives us so many like positive, like I'm trying not to sound like a prosperity gospel person, but that or a name it and claim it. We're supposed to be positive, but like that you're called to love, you're called to love God. Like it's things that you're called to do. It's not just hate sin, hate the devil, hate this, that, and the other. It's really the only reason that we do hate those things is because we love God
Mm-hmm.
and we love his commandments. And we know, that's even like just what you were saying, Nick, it kind of made me think I'm gonna try real hard not to get like political because that's not what we do. But it
Why
makes me
not?
think of that when you have the kind of a religious um Christian in name only, or just not Christian but conservative side versus the liberal side. It's ugly on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And so you definitely see that when two things hate each other, but they don't really have any positive.
Because evil, and we could slot in hate for this. Hate can't make you love anything, right? Evil can't
Right.
create something. It has to twist things that are good and make them evil. So hate will never create a relationship. It will never repair anything. It will only corrupt things that are good. One of the things I love, and it's a great sermon, and it's in its own like short book collection in Crossway, but it's The Expulsive Power of a New Affection by Thomas Chalmers. In that, like, even just the title alone says so much. Like the power of not not hating. Obviously, we hate our sin, but we hate our sin because we have a new affection, and that's what pushes us forward. Um, it's expulsive. It pushes the other things out of the way, but it's not. It's our hatred of sin is fueled by love, actually, by affection, uh, which is totally backwards to not only like what the world thinks, like the how the world thinks things work, but also what the world thinks of us. You know, we hate the things we hate because we love God and we love his glory, and therefore we hate the things that detract from his glory and um actually hide his glory.
Yeah. And even though like Christians do have sin and
Mhm.
there's a lot of
Oh
issues.
yeah. Oh yeah.
But kind of like what you're saying is that we Christians do have a unified goal of
Mhm.
God's glory, or should. And So that is a unified goal. And then when you're talking about somebody who's not a Christian, they may have overlapping goals. They may get along with this person or that person, but in some way they have different goals of self. And those selves are not the same selves. Each person has their own goal of selfishness that is their own. And not that Christians are not selfish sometimes, and we still have all that, but we try at least to grow towards God's glory as being our
that selfishness should be the exception, not the rule.
Right. Yeah. We always have to clarify that. Maybe can't we just be perfect?
Was that like the Wesleyan holiness?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, you get that second work of grace, and it's all upward and outward from here.
Yeah, yeah.
You'll never sin again. You'll just make mistakes.
Never sin again.
Or just like Todd White, like I
Yeah,
sinned in 9 years or whatever he said.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One new man or whatever.
Yeah.
So
it sounds nice.
Man, doesn't it though? It really does.
Yeah, I'd take
preach.
it, but
no,
not sure. I have my doubts on parts of it.
A helicopter is about to hit my house. Gosh, my windows are vibrating.
We'll make sure to give you a nice eulogy.
Thank you. Remember me when I'm gone.
You will.
This is why they'll remember.
We'll weep by your grave like Finway.
Yes, as I pass.
Then we'll dig you up and see if your body actually decomposes.
Yeah. Put it on the calendar. We'll check in like 10 years or so. We'll see how it goes.
Yes. Put me in a time capsule.
St. Zach Day.
Yes. That sounds
Foolproof.
Awesome. What would I be the
method.
Patron saint of?
Grandpa's.
Yeah, prune juice.
3D printed fish.
Helicopters.
I'm intrigued at how we got onto the subject of selfishness and whatnot. It makes sense with Feanor, but I think it especially shows in his relatively doomed marriage as well. I feel the real loser in this chapter is his poor wife Nerdanel. I really feel terrible for her.
Yeah, and the first thing we should feel terrible about is whoever gave her that name. It literally starts with nerd. Her parents are like, let's just name this nerd.
Her pet name was Nerd.
Nerd.
Yeah, Nerdanel. Man, yeah, what a great name. I like the description of her. Nerdanel was also firm of will, but more patient than Feanor, desiring to understand minds rather than to master them. And at first she restrained him when the fire of his heart grew too hot, but his later deeds grieved her and they became estranged. I can't imagine it's easy to be husband to the guy who basically killed his mother.
I know it's June, but you meant wife.
Oh yeah, wife. Sorry for him to be your husband. Whatever. Yeah, I'm so tired.
It can't be easy to be husband to that guy.
It's true.
Yeah, it's not an incorrect statement. Be easier to be his wife than his husband.
That was good. That was good, Lee. Good job.
But yes, true story. They would not. I can't imagine. It's like the world's largest narcissist, second to Melkor.
Yeah.
And Sauron, I guess.
The last sentence of the chapter, she gets another mention there. And it says, for Feanor was driven by the fire of his own heart only, working ever swiftly alone, and he asked the aid and sought the counsel of none that dwelt in Aman, great or small, save only, and for a little while, of Nerdnell the Wise, his wife. So she's the only one who could kind of restrain him, but it wasn't for very long. And
She was a real Proverbs 31 woman, though.
yeah.
Man, she stuck by him. They had 7 sons. She was probably grateful to have some company, although his sons were real works of art as well. They really took after, a lot of them really took after their dad.
It says some of them took after her too.
They did. Some of them did. Yeah,
Says some, but not all.
Those bad boys though, they remind me a lot of Joseph's brothers, like very just like punks and like desperate to do the wrong thing. And like I said before, we'll see that really happen. But and then contrast that with his brother, with Feanor's half brothers, by Indus. Fingolfin is like one of the biggest heroes of the First Age. He's awesome. All of Finway's sons made their mark in a certain way, but Feanor's was certainly, the biggest mark and the darkest one. Okay, I want to read a quote. So I brought it up here on my stinking Kindle. I'm gonna read the long quote, and maybe we can riff on it a little bit because I think it's interesting. So the wedding of his father was not pleasing to Feanor, and he had no great love for Indus, nor for Fingolfin or Finarfin, her sons. He lived apart from them, exploring the land of Aman, or busying himself with the knowledge and the crafts in which he delighted. So he's going on more and more isolating himself and doing works in secret, which is not healthy. In those unhappy things which later came to pass, spoiler alert, and in which Feanor was the leader, many saw the effect of this breach within the house of Finwë, judging that if Finwë had endured his loss, and been content with the fathering of his mighty son, the courses of Feanor would have been otherwise, and great evil might have been prevented. For the sorrow and the strife in the house of Finwë is graven in the memory of the Noldoran elves. But the children of Indus were great and glorious, and their children also. And if they had not lived, the history of the Eldar would have been diminished. So when I was reading again, this long quote struck me because, on one hand, is Finwë somewhat responsible for the events that happened by Feanor's hand, because of his going on to be married. I love Zach's. I like your reaction. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. and then it gives the silver lining but also if they hadn't been married, there, Fingolfin and Finarfin wouldn't have entered the world, and their deeds were so excellent and magnificent that I think their deeds alone staved off the sunset of the Eldar in a lot of ways. So Zach, what's your take?
It seems. Can you imagine? Can you imagine, like, you lose your spouse, and then you find someone who makes you happy again after that, and something bad happens with your child, right? But then other people are like, well, if you had just, not gotten married again, this wouldn't have happened. Can you imagine what kind of reaction you would have to that? Like, that, I would be livid. But these people are basically like, it's like a historian looking back, right? Like, if he hadn't have done this, everything would have been great. But his option, had he known that, right, it would have been like, okay, maybe I'll just, deal with my loss forever, literally forever. But why would you intentionally live your life in the state of misery? Like that's what is it, asceticism?
Yeah, to purposely inflict pain or discomfort on yourself.
Yeah, there's no reason for it. It just seems silly to me. But if you have the advantage of being able to understand the significance of the passage of time, then yeah, maybe you just, hey, I'll just be miserable. Not me though.
Well, Feanor is just
I'm so glad you got to do it this time, Zach. I'm really happy.
I thought we were gonna make it through without acknowledging it. Like we're professionals now.
I can't. I can't. It makes me so happy. Maybe one day I will, but
there's a space on your bingo. It's like a free space. But Feanor legit is like a spoiled only child, which I don't think any of us here are spoiled only children. I'm sorry if our 2 listeners are also spoiled only children. But it's like he just needs to get over himself. I don't know. But I think it was already doomed from the beginning. But yeah, it is interesting, like you can look back on any major thing in history, like, oh, if only we hadn't done this and that would have not happened. But then you see the good that comes out of those things, and that's just the way God works through stuff, even the bad things. So it's just kind of legitimately necessary evils sometimes. But I don't know, Feanor's he's like the incarnate like hubris of the elves. He's just all pride, and he can't handle not being the star of the show.
Feanor did nothing wrong. I'm gonna defend him real quick. Put me as his lawyer, all right? My client is, pleading the fifth right now, and I'm gonna defend him. Okay, so it talks about Indus. Does she show up like really anywhere else? She's gone, right?
Not to my recollection. Well, it's her sons everybody talks about.
We're not going to judge her based on her children, okay?
Right.
What we can judge her on is that she is in all ways unlike Muriel, who I think was a good woman. And if she was a good woman, that means Indus is an evil woman. And Feanor was right. He upset his father for marrying her.
Man.
I rest my case.
The prosecution has nothing.
You win.
Plus, she was golden haired and tall, so she's like a colonizer, oppressor.
Thank you.
Keeping all the dark haired elves down. Not fair. Time for justice.
Yeah. That isn't really a serious thing, but in what ways is she unlike? Is it just in physical appearance? Does that mean that Muriel's short? Are elves short?
Yeah, I've never known that elves would be like significantly shorter than anyone else, especially at this point. I could see like the woodland elves maybe being shorter than other elves because they're, living in the trees and kind of camouflaging or whatnot. But at this point, everybody's just living in paradise.
So in what way is she unlike Muriel?
Maybe it's she was stronger in character. and could put up with
Maybe
more.
she was an introvert and Muriel was an extrovert.
Okay.
She was
All right.
stingier with the life force in her, which is why she had more than one son. I don't know.
That makes sense.
And they had 4 children total, right?
I believe
they had
so.
2 sons and 2 daughters.
Yes.
I think.
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, and it is weird. She really doesn't get any more mentions anywhere else either. It's kind of like, oh, she's Fingolfin and Finarfin's mom. Weren't they cool?
Which, by the way, I feel like every time I hear Finarfin, it's like one of those like Christianese like safe swear words that you could say.
I'm Finarfin around over here.
Like stub your toe, Finarfin. Just follow me for more tips.
You know, it's funny, in early drafts of the Silmarillion, the Noldor were just called the gnomes. And there's like other little silly names too that, like, I'm really glad Tolkien changed this to Noldor. But I swear, like Finarfin and Nerdanel, like these names are like holdover names from those early drafts, and we're not properly Tolkienified.
I definitely agree on Nerd now.
I've heard some, like, if you watch some of the like YouTube, the Lord of the Rings nerd stuff, I always love how sometimes they like pronounce the names. They're like very exotic. So I probably can't do it, but I heard like Nerdanel. Like, oh, okay. So they say it like that, and then it doesn't sound so bad.
Yeah, they do funny things with like the R's sometimes and the L's. I remember I watched somebody do a scathing critique of anybody that referred to the mountain that Monway lives on as Taniquetil, and they were really mad at the guy that read the audiobook because he said Taniquetil, and it's pronounced Taniquetil. And like the guy got all up in arms about it. Like, I don't know. They both sound like weird names.
And without an accent mark, like, how are you supposed to know?
Yeah, how would you know that? Well, apparently, if you look at the grammatical rules of Elvish and all this stuff, I'm like, that's a level of nerd I will never attain. If that makes me less of a Tolkien fan, I will wear that badge, but I will never. I'll never be able to get to that level.
Yeah, wear it like a cream cheese hat of honor.
Yes.
We should get you a literal thing that says less of a Tolkien fan. Like an actual badge.
If we ever get to the part where we have merch, that would be great merch.
You can have like levels, and then the bottom, like, or the top level would be like Taniquetil versus this.
It'll be the new shibboleth.
Yeah, we've probably already, or at least I have already scared people away that are hardcore on pronunciations, because I'm like, in my mind I read it and I'm like, that's what it says, and I hear someone else, I'm like, oh, or not.
Oh, could be this
definitely
other
been
way.
saying that wrong this whole time.
Yeah.
Just put it through Google Translate.
Deal with it.
I'm
If
just
you're
really
listening-
proud that I know how to say the C's right.
Oh yeah, Celeborn instead of Celeborn,
Yeah,
for example.
yeah, it's not Celeborn.
Yeah.
Celeborn.
So in the middle of the chapter, we get a split off from the Feanor story, and then we talk about Melkor, who's been chained up since Tulkas gave him a black eye a couple chapters ago, and he's been on trial and in the drunk tank for a while. And so now they bring him out basically for his parole hearing, which is basically what this is.
3 ages.
3 ages. It's a long time.
What is that like, Zach? Like, none of us have experienced that. What are 3 ages like?
It's like any other thing where you live through time. I don't know. I wasn't prepared for that.
Yeah.
Ask me again later.
I was calling you old.
Oh. Yeah.
I was implying that you've lived
3 ages.
Three
For, like,
ages. Yeah.
thousands of years or whatever.
Yeah. It feels like it sometimes, for sure.
Yeah. But you're not that old.
Especially, the longer we go on with this podcast.
So 3 ages he's been in the halls of, in the duress of Mandos. So obviously it's been some work to keep him locked up. But he was brought before the thrones of the Valar, and I love this quote. I highlighted it. So he's before the Valar now in the throne room. Then he looked upon their glory and their bliss, and envy was in his heart. He looked upon the children of Iluvatar that sat at the feet of the mighty, meaning of Manwë, and hatred filled him. He looked upon the wealth of bright gems, which were probably all of Feanor's making, and he lusted for them, but he hid his thoughts and postponed his vengeance. All of the toxic things we just talked about before are all things that he did in the span of this one paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
Envy, selfishness, secret thoughts that he won't tell anybody about, and he'll act otherwise in delaying his bad behavior for an opportune time.
Yeah, there's a good list there.
It's a good list. I don't know about you guys. I'm gonna my hot take is Melkor's a jerk.
Melkor did nothing wrong.
You heard it here first, folks.
As Melkor's attorney,
You a criminal defense lawyer?
He's pleading the fifth. We're gonna talk through. We'd like a little bit of an extension because I've got to figure this out. This is gonna be a difficult one for me, to be honest.
The man's been in prison 3 ages. He has no friends on the outside to bond him out. We need some time to craft this case.
Well, except for Nienna, apparently.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. The one person really who speaks up for him is Nienna, the Vala of crying. Basically.
I saw it as like a pity, like she
Mhm.
contributed to pitying him.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure he's very good at making himself pitiable too.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for pity. Like if my kids get in trouble and they're just really just sad because I took away their Nintendo Switch, but they're like got the pouty lip going, I'm like, oh, okay, fine. So maybe I'm a little bit of Nienna.
Boys, this is your signal. Get your Switch back. She's weak.
Melkor, can you cry? Juror number 6. She'll go for that.
He had to abase himself. So
Yeah.
I guess that's his version of crying.
He cried and the tear froze as it went down his godly cheek.
Because of his power, all of
Yeah.
his, what was it, like hot ice?
Yeah, he was a master of not only fire and like lava and stuff, but also ice. And his initial fortress was under ice.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't really think about that with the Dark Lord because we have Sauron in our minds and Mordor and all the fires, but Melkor is just as much ice cold as he is burning hot.
He's cooler than cool.
So he abases himself, tries to give himself the best self-representation as possible because Nick wasn't there to take his case before Manwë.
Yeah.
Never talk to them without your attorney.
Yeah, exactly. He should have said attorney right away.
I want my phone call.
I will say it's interesting though how it says here that Manwë being free from evil, like just had a hard time fathoming him staying evil. And I do think that that's, I mean, obviously I'm not free from evil. I'm a sinner like the rest of
Hmm.
us. But there is that element when you're generally like you have goodwill towards other
Hmm.
people, you tend to
Hmm.
believe it's easier to be deceived by people that act that way
Hmm.
because you think that they think like you do.
Hmm.
And so we can be prone to being gullible if you're not careful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, how else would he know, I guess?
Right, because he's not all
Ulmo figured
knowing.
it out.
Because Manwë, none of the Valar are all knowing. Only Eru the One knows
Right.
everything, and so they're just acting on delegated power from Eru. And so yeah, so without experience of knowing evil, the only evil they knew was from Melkor. And if he's saying he's going back on it now, I could see the temptation to want to embrace him. Finally, he's come around, you know,
Mhm.
after all this time, after the war that we fought, finally he's come around.
There's
Except
that.
not.
It's interesting too how Ulmo's like really the only one that's not, it says he's not deceived. And
And
I wonder, you
Tulkas.
said, yeah, Tolkos was like ready to fight all the time.
He's been on him like stink on a skunk for a
Yeah,
long time.
Yes. Tulkas doesn't forget.
yeah.
So based.
Slow to wrath and slow to forget.
He's kind of slow, but yeah.
But I wonder what it is about Ulmo. Like, is it in a sense he's not omniscient, but because water is everywhere, like maybe he knows the schemes more because he can.
I think he's the most acquainted with the evil of Melkor because he spends all of his time in Middle Earth and he's seen
Mm,
all of the wreck that was made on the landscape of Middle Earth in the course of the war. I think he's the most familiar with the works of Melkor, um, in the schemes, the hatred that he has, and what effects he's had on the world.
And he lives in the music.
He lives. I mean, he really. I think of truly, my opinion, of all of the Valar, Ulmo is the most in tune with the music of Eru.
Hmm.
mm.
They say that Manwë is closest in mind to Eru, but I think Ulmo gets more things than Manwë does. But Manwë is he's like the opposite of Ulmo, right? Because he sits on top of Taniquetil all the time. And his eagles are the ones that are in Middle Earth looking around and reporting back to him.
Hmm.
He's completely separate from the creation.
There's one other character here who I do not think was deceived. It doesn't say it explicitly, but I think Mandos's silence
Hmm.
Mm.
Hmm.
is
That says everything.
I think that says quite a bit. And he's going to have a lot of that familiarity with Melkor from basically chilling with him for a long time.
Hmm.
Uh I, I think he's in that camp as well.
Hmm.
Knowing and he's probably the one who has the most experience with evil because of that.
Hmm.
I mean, I know Ulmo saw it manifesting, but um, but Mandos is kind of like the you know, going and visiting Hannibal Lecter in prison, uh, kind of thing. You know, gets to know
Well,
him pretty well.
and he's kind of the guy. I know it's not made explicit, but he's kind of the guy for whom justice is kind of his nature. You know, like he's not exactly a judge, but like being the one that holds, you know, death or you know it, the chains of eternity. You know, I think he has Mandos has an innate sense of justice that perhaps others don't because of that, straddling both worlds. I wonder if Muriel ever had an interaction with Melkor, right? Because she's in the halls of Mandos when her spirit passes away. I don't know if this is like a Sheol, like 2-section kind of thing where like she's over here chilling, where the righteous live, and then Melkor's over here in this other side, the more condemned jail type side, or if they were ever able to actually interact.
I like to think of it. I know that this is a fictional story and everything, but I'm going to go ahead and give my opinion, which is that there's a section where he was chained up, and the only time he experienced interaction with other people was when Mandos would bring him his 3 square meals a day. And for the rest of the time, he was left to, reflecting on his actions.
His 3 chunks of ice. 3 squares of ice a day.
That's my thought.
That seems fitting. Like, of all the people that should have solitary confinement for 3 ages, it would be Melkor, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is interesting how I flipped back to the Coming of the Elves chapter where Melkor's locked up. That Mondos is definitely a valor of few words. Because at one point it says he broke his silence, saying, "So it is doomed," which we talked about. But he doesn't say a whole lot.
Yeah, he's the Vala with if he has a desk, it has the thing that says the buck stops here on his desk. And when you're that guy, you really don't have to say a lot. Like, you take counsel and then you make your decision and it's done.
He's like the Ron Swanson that like spins his desk around while you're trying to talk to him and pretends you're not there.
I will now forever imagine Monway with that mustache. And a glass of bourbon on his desk. Because clear alcohol is for women. That's what he said on the show.
Oh. Thought you were just...
It must be a Presbyterian thing. I don't understand.
So they do let him free.
Let's that line though, because since we already talked about Tulkas and Ulmo not being deceived, they didn't speak up though. They didn't rebel against the order, and Tolkien has that line.
So good too.
Yeah, where he says, "But they obeyed the judgment of Manwë, for those who will defend authority against rebellion must not themselves rebel."
What a mic drop moment.
Yeah. That was quite the quote.
It's so good.
That is a tendency that I struggle with, I would say. In defending authority, rebelling sometimes. I think that is something that where I am not like them.
Well, you're an American.
Yeah.
I think this is Tolkien's dig against the Americans.
Yeah.
But in some sense, that was brought up to me because I struggle. Like, I am a rule follower. Like, was not about wearing the masks, but like I go to Home Depot and there's all the signs about wearing the masks, and I'm like about to break out in hives because my husband's not wearing a mask. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But it was brought up to me that, like, in our case, we have a democracy. It gives us the right, and they don't have the right to mandate those things. So that was helpful. Like, you're not actually being a rebel against authority. You're saying you actually don't have the legal authority to do these things. Yeah, so it's not the same as being a rebel. You're actually holding them accountable to their level of authority that they have.
Yeah.
Except I enjoyed it.
As you ought to as an American.
Yeah,
You
I
You should
guess
take pleasure in liberty.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I guess that's true.
Freedom, baby.
That is, I have a book that I haven't read yet. I started to, but I didn't have the chance. I want to say it was Sam Waldron's book. I can't remember. I know he wrote a book about the revolution. But there's the question of should they have,
hmm
biblically speaking, like should that
Yeah.
have happened or not? I don't know. It's probably a topic for another day, but
Yeah, because it wasn't completely
Good
clear at the
question.
time. There was still lots of debate in the moment. Good people on both sides. That
yeah.
wanted to stay with the crown, and others that wanted to be emancipated.
Well, and it comes down to like the like when you think of those who stayed in the Anglican Church or the Church of England, during the time before that, with the
Mhm.
Puritans and whether or not, 'cause some like didn't necessarily agree with it, but they didn't want to seem schismatic,
Yeah.
whereas others felt that their, conscience
Mhm.
required that. It's an interesting conversation.
And then the ones who stayed and thought they were doing the right thing got expelled anyway.
Right.
That's what
They
you get
also
that's what you get for your loyalty, right?
they also
And then
beheaded the
legalized.
king.
Right.
They did well. I mean,
They did they did a little bit more. They did a little bit more as
Yeah,
well.
and now we've got a new Charles.
Yeah.
What mischief could we have?
I think quite a bit.
A pagan
I want to
a
quantify
pagan
just how
fake
much.
king.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did any of you watch the coronation?
Yeah, I did. I watched some of it. I didn't get to watch all of it, but it was disgusting. It was properly disgusting. I thought it was weird that they had all of the faith leaders of all the different pagan religions handing the items to the king.
Yeah, that just goes to show you how like kind of gullible. I'm like, maybe he is a Christian because like he's going through like, pledging his
Mhm. Mhm.
stance for how he's going to proclaim Jesus Christ. And I was like, oh, that's
Mhm.
kind of cool. They go in and do like some sort of secret mass thing in the
Mhm.
back, and then come out. And then he goes and chats up with like literally all these other world religions. And I was like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
So progressive.
There
And
was
the
a
and the
rumor.
lady that was like in charge of the altar guild or whatever the thing was, carrying the sword the whole time too. Like
She looked like a stewardess in an airplane.
she did. That outfit was so weird. She really did look like she should have been working on an airplane. It was weird. It was so weird.
There was a rumor that he was going to change his title of Defender of the Faith to Defender of the Faiths or Defender of Faith.
Oh.
I don't know if they actually went through with that or if he kept Defender of the Faith, but I mean, if the head of your church, which he is the head
Legally,
of
yes.
the Church of England,
Mhm.
if the head of your church is Defender of the Faiths or just Defender of Faith, which vaguely,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
many-
called.
just
So cool.
assume there are quote marks on every word I've used. Maddie's over here like getting exercise from doing quote marks on all these things because
Exercise.
Exercise. England, quote unquote.
yeah, all of these
King,
words.
quote unquote.
Uh, but I don't know whether what title he ended up keeping. But that's the one that Henry VIII got before he decided to split.
To get divorced. I mean, reform.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, old King Alfred would be so upset that his England has become this. I think he would be very sad.
Yeah. We should dig him up.
So civilizations fall as we were talking about earlier in the episode.
Yeah.
The corruption.
The first king. He was like the best one.
The
And he was
best.
the first
Maybe
king of
the
all
greatest
England.
one. He might have
Yeah.
been the greatest one.
Might have been.
I guess we'll have to dig him up to make sure that like confirmed. But
Because
Just
of
like
Alfred
Washington
the
being
Great.
the best president, right? You peak
Yeah.
early at the noontide, and it's just a slow descent from there.
Mhm.
But we don't call him George Washington the Great.
No.
Maybe we
But you're
should
true.
though.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Although he was, well,
We call him George
Yeah.
Washington of the bad dentures.
I can go into so many conspiracy theories right now. I'm just not gonna. Just gonna shut
Although
it down.
I still maintain that Calvin Coolidge was our greatest president.
man, come on. Grover Cleveland.
He was the
Clearly.
man.
It was
No,
clearly Grover Cleveland.
no president out of New York has ever been the greatest president. And that counts for Donald Trump.
I think
You take it back right now.
two of the best presidents have been from New York. Because Martin Van Buren, he's up there too.
Okay.
So
Yeah, Van
New
Buren
York
was
is
pretty
like-
cool.
New York's like the best state for presidents. I don't
Was.
think that still holds.
Laugh sarcastically in FDR. And would so again, not to go too political, but I listen to Jonah Goldberg's podcast, The Remnant, sometimes. And for the last few years, every time he'll go on an anti-Woodrow Wilson rant, who is the worst American president, they play the Mordor theme from Lord of the Rings behind him as he talks about Woodrow Wilson. And I think it's the best.
I like it.
The former producer was a big Tolkien fan, and they introduced it when he was running the show, and it's amazing. It's great. That is their version of the significance of the passage of time for us. It's like a little Easter egg.
Nice.
I recently
it.
switched and allowed Wilson to become he took that first place spot of the worst president.
Good.
FDR
Man, he's
put in a
terrible.
good effort though. Put in
Yeah.
a great effort, but he had more time.
It was a very competitive race to the bottom.
Yeah.
Did y'all school, like, I went to public school. Most of our middle schools and elementary schools were named after presidents.
Mhm.
Is
They're
that
terrible
Yeah.
ones. The bad
yeah,
ones.
mine I went to LBJ.
All of ours
Ooh.
are named after
Ooh.
Confederate presidents. So every school is Robert E. Lee High School.
I was
Now they have to
homeschooled.
burn the whole school down.
My school was named after Christ.
Ooh.
So I got you all beat.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were
Ultimate
the
Jesus
fortunate
juke.
homeschooled one.
Jesus himself taught my class.
I started out at Hope Christian,
Hmm.
and then I went to a public school for second grade now in hindsight, I remember as a second grader thinking that my teacher was cuckoo because she would tell us that the rock in her class could hear us, and if we got too loud, it would hurt its feelings. And I was like, she's insane. Now that I'm an adult with children, I was like, she is a genius. That's like how she was trying to keep all of these kids
Oh,
quiet.
that's
Was like,
good.
you're gonna hurt the pet rock's feelings if you're too
Oh, that's
loud.
brilliant.
Yeah, genius.
That's brilliant.
But me as a 7-year-old was like, this chick's crazy. Get me out of here.
But in your little rule follower heart, did it help
I
you?
was a bit more depraved
Okay.
as a second grader. I probably did though.
You stupid rock.
I
deserve- You deserve to be made fun of, you dumb rock.
I would chuck you in my driveway and no one could find you.
So here I'll do like a little confession. When that time period, everyone was losing their canine teeth and they were growing in. So I told all the kids that they're turning into vampires. And I freaked myself out. Like I believed my own lie. So we had to go to the nurse's office because we were all crying. Like, I'm turning into a vampire.
What's like being hoisted on your own petard? Is that a version of that?
Something like that.
Can you imagine how great it would have been though if you were right?
Yeah.
I made a cool movie.
We would have been undying 7th graders.
That's basically a YA novel series.
Oh,
Harry Potter meets Twilight.
Ugh.
That might be why I still glitter in the sun. Which can we just say why glittering vampires?
Makes no sense
I
to
don't know.
me.
I don't even feel like I want to even bring that into this podcast, but
When people started
Too
saying
late.
that, I literally thought that they meant like the vampires were putting on like sunblock.
to like reflect the light.
Yeah. But no, it's just like the nature of vampires in that terrible series.
See, that's what makes here, we'll bring it all back. That's what makes that type of fiction terrible,
Mm-hmm.
is that you don't follow what you're supposed to follow. Like in
Mhm.
Tolkien, the evil thing is the evil thing.
Yeah.
In Twilight, apparently you can redeem vampires and make them glittering
Or the stories where you can
Batman.
where you train a dragon, and make the dragon your
Yeah.
friend. It's not supposed to
Oh,
work that
that's-
way.
Oh, but it's so cool though.
Yeah.
That
but it's not
movie
supposed to be
spoiled
that
me.
way.
Like, I want a dragon.
Dragon tales, dragon tales.
Can you still be saved in
Wow.
like dragons?
Yes.
No.
Yes. No. Okay. I guess I'm going to hell.
No,
I do think
you
so.
can.
The sparkly vampires don't they break one of your rules for literature, Nick?
Sparkly
about-
vampires?
About messing with. Oh, I'm trying to remember how you worded it. Like messing with something for no reason. Like need
Oh,
this.
yeah.
Oh crap! I forget how you
Embracing
worded
Like
it.
immorality.
creativity for like no,
no
reason.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, like
Playing with
you-
tropes in a terrible way that
It's
doesn't add
becoming
to the
its
story.
own trope. Like it's the
Yeah.
trope is now that you're undoing a trope.
yeah,
Like
Yeah.
that you're like now
fast
it's
zombies.
it's the redemption story of the evil wicked witch, how she really was just misunderstood and was the good guy all along.
Mhm. The Maleficent movie.
Exactly.
Oh, I was
But they're
thinking
all
of
that
Wicked.
way.
Yeah.
Imagine somebody doing like
That's-
a postmodern retelling of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but from the White Witch's perspective. That kind of a thing. Or Wicked, like Wicked.
Yeah.
The play.
I just
Yeah, maybe
wanted to
she
trick
was-
this little boy.
Yeah, she was like she
I just wanted to share the
drag
Turkish
queen
delight.
story hour.
Oh.
It's like drag queen story hour trying to get the kids to come see your show. And all the closed-minded right-wingers wouldn't let
That's right.
the children.
This stupid lion that took him away.
This is the world my kids are inheriting. I'm so excited.
Upside
Oh,
down world.
yeah.
Amazing.
Sorry, thanks to y'all and your Pride Month memes. That's like on the forefront of my mind right now.
Well, if it wasn't the
welcome.
memes, it would be something else that would make it arrive at the forefront.
I like to stay in my little cocoon, safe from all the crazies.
It's kind of funny that like what it says about your times when like escapism is reading like medieval fiction or fiction based on medieval tropes like Tolkien. Like the fact that we're escaping to the medieval world really says a lot about
Right.
what's going on in popular culture.
I'm just gonna go read some stories about Vlad the Impaler just to make myself feel better.
You read Dracula and make jokes about the blue fur lady. It's
Man,
dark
I'm
times.
having some Dracula nostalgia. I am ready to go there again.
So maybe for the last item of this episode, I don't know if I sent this to you guys, but there's a Substack that goes out as a newsletter, and it's Dracula Daily, and it follows the dates of the diary entries in Dracula, and it emails them to you each day as it occurs in the diaries. So it started at the beginning of May, and it is very interesting to read it that way, practically in real time.
Yeah.
Dracula Daily is what it's called. I'll have to share the link. It's pretty interesting. I think
just,
it is.
Just skip Lucy's letters.
Yeah, those were tough.
Just skip the whole thing.
What?
How dare you?
Get out of here.
How dare you? You're fired.
It was easy. I just did it.
Go take your NyQuil, Grandpa.
I'm about to.
Well, thank you one and all for joining us this evening and reading along with us. We will be back in our next episode, either with the next chapter or some other miscellaneous topic that more interests us at that moment. Until then, may Manwe keep you in the one, and peace out.
Peace. Peace out.
Do we want to go on in this episode and talk about the Unchaining of Melkor, or do we want to break here and do a separate episode on Melkor? It doesn't matter to me, but I want to, if we do split it, I'd rather do a little outro and then come back in to sound more official. I don't know how long we've actually been talking on this so far. It's probably close to an hour.
I would say do it now so that we don't take too long on a 5-page chapter. We want our listeners
there's a lot there.
We want our list. Well, hopefully all 4 of us make it to the end of the Silmarils before we die.
That would be good. That would be good.
Zach may not make it to the end of this one, though.
This episode, let alone the rest of the book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Zach the Undying.
Yeah. We got to hurry it up for Gramps over there.